Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining and welcome to the webinar presented by the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, presenting the SEACAP Toolbox, so the Sustainable Energy and Access and Climate Action Plan Toolbox. I'm Kruti. I work at the GIZ, which is one of the partners of the CoM SSA, and we are presenting this webinar along with ICLEI Africa. A few housekeeping rules before we start the webinar. We have live interpretation for this webinar, so it's available in English and French. You can find the interpretation button usually on the bottom of your screen. And you can please mute your original audio if the speaker is too loud and you don't hear the interpretation too well. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be shared with the attendees just after the session. And we encourage everybody to also send in your feedback and responses and comments in the chat, and please engage actively. With that background, I can just quickly start. I see most of the attendees are already CoM SSA cities, so I don't need to introduce this in depth. But CoM SSA, as many of us already know, it's the regional chapter of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is an alliance of over 9,000 cities. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the network has already 230 plus cities and local governments that are making ambitious climate commitments and sharing good practices. As part of the climate change commitments that most CoM SSA signatories make, they also commit to develop a sustainable energy access and climate action plan, which is a SEACAP. And this webinar is about introducing some of the tools that have been developed by CoM SSA to support cities along this journey of developing their SEACAPs. And this tool is actually called the SEACAP Toolbox. The flow of the webinar today, I'm just starting with this introduction, and I will shortly hand over to Rebecca, who will introduce the SEACAP Toolbox, and then the team, Rebecca's team will also introduce the different modules of the SEACAP, so taking over the content, the different pillars of the SEACAP, what the toolbox includes, how it can be used, where to find it, and so on. And then in the last half an hour, we will have question and answer. So please feel free as the presenters go on to put in your questions and comments in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we will address them towards the end. With that, I can give over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kruti. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a great privilege to have you all here with us on the 1st of December. We're very proud to be presenting the SEACAP Toolbox to you as a useful resource for all CoM SSA signatories. And what we're going to start with first, though, is a poll. So Sonia's going to make the poll active, so you should see this on your screen soon. But we are asking you 3 questions as to start us off on this webinar. First of all, are you currently working on a SEACAP? So yes, no, I don't know. Which pillar do you foresee being a priority for your city? So is it energy access pillar, climate mitigation pillar, climate adaptation pillar, or actually all of the pillars are equally important to your city? And then which phase of the SEACAP do you find most challenging? So is it the data collection, the target setting, or the action planning? And you'll find this third question if you scroll down on the poll. So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to answer the poll. So please take the opportunity to do so now. And then we'll have a look at the results to see who's all in the room and to understand the interest of our different participants. Okay, so we have about 1/3 of participants have responded. So I'm going to give everyone a bit more time to respond. I see we got some, it's like kind of watching watching a race as the number of people who've participated increases. So I'll just give that a little bit more time. Okay, great. Thank you so much to everyone for answering the poll. This is our first of 2 polls today. So Sonia, if you could close it for us and we can have a look at the results. So everyone, you should be able to see the results on your screen now. So it's really helpful to know that actually of everyone who answered the poll, 63% are actually currently working on a SEACAP, and 38% are not yet working on a SEACAP. But everyone who answered knows whether they are working on a SEACAP, which is great. So this will also be the intention of today is to be this is quite a practical tool, especially for those looking to start their SEACAP journey and those already on their SEACAP journey. So it's great to have you here. Then the next question, if we look down at that, which pillar do you see being a priority for your city? This is such an important question for us because we know that cities, have to prioritize. And although all 3 pillars have incredible value to cities, each city, of course, you need to understand where your resources and capacity can be best used for the current priorities your city is facing. So the results, we have an overall winner of climate adaptation being an overall priority for 44% of respondents. And that, and we'll be discussing, of course, why we very much understand why that is. And that's why it's very critical and core to the work that we're doing. And then we have a tie between energy access and climate mitigation. But actually, second to adaptation, respondents and all of you really are seeing that all 3 pillars are equally important to your city. So finding that balance and prioritizing different actions will, of course, be key. And then our final question, which phase of the SEACAP process do you find most challenging? So here, quite interesting, we have data collection and analysis, which is at 56%. This is kind of the greatest proportion of respondents saying that this is the most challenging piece of the process of the SEACAP. And what's very interesting to note is that this SEACAP toolbox actually provides lots of tools and methodologies and approaches to help cities, especially in this data collection and analysis phase. And then, of course, we have action planning being second, and then target setting. So this is a very helpful information. Thank you for responding to this poll. It also helps all of us who are presenting today to really kind of pitch the presentation correctly. So thank you very much for participating in that quick poll. And please do continue to engage, as Kruti did mention. So importantly, and maybe I should have done this first, so apologies. I'm Rebecca Cameron. I'm a Senior Professional Officer at ICLEI Africa, and I work on the CoM SSA project. And today I will be moderating, and I'll also be introducing you to our 4 different speakers from ICLEI Africa. So first of all, under the CoM SSA initiative, local authorities are invited to make voluntary political commitments to implementing sustainable energy access and climate action plans. And of course, this involves 3 different pillars: climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and access to sustainable energy. The SEACAP is a key document that sets the strategies, plans, and actions for sustainable and low emission development, while including adaptation actions and ensuring access to secure, affordable, and sustainable energy in response to current and future aspects of climate change. But as we have so many cities today who are actually already working on their SEACAPs, this is not new information for you, but rather maybe you can use this information to share with other cities and other colleagues. So what is the CoM SSA SEACAP Toolbox that has been developed? So we're proud to present this resource to support local governments to develop sustainable energy access and climate action plans. And the CoM SSA SEACAP Toolbox really complements the existing JRC SEACAP Guidebook that already exists and is available for all signatories. on the CoMSA website. And the SEACAP Toolbox provides an easy-to-use step-by-step series of actually presentations for each of the 3 pillars of the SEACAP, and also additional documentation and support and tools. So not only on the 3 pillars, but also on other important aspects. So please take note that this toolbox is updated on a regular basis, so annually, and a French version will be available early next year. Currently, it is available in English, but we are working very hard to make sure that this will be available in French as a resource for all cities. So the SEACAP Toolbox is divided into 4 modules with an overview document provided for ease of navigation. So it's almost like a bit of a map and a guide. And this overview document actually includes links where you can click on the link and it will take you directly to that module and chapter. So each module includes a number of chapters, and the modules that we've developed so far, because we will be adding to this over time, is the first module is setting the scene. So unpacking matters around climate change and also the CoMSA initiative. Then the second module is with regards to climate mitigation pillar. The third module is the energy access pillar, and the 4th module is on the adaptation pillar. So each chapter is presented as a presentation, but this will be expanded upon with future updates. But each of these presentations also includes links to freely available tools and other resources and templates that cities can make use of. And this is what each of our speakers will be providing with more in-depth detail today. So today, each pillar will be presented and we'll cover kind of what is the kind of each of the pillars, a description of each of the pillars, an overview of the background to why that pillar is important, an introduction to the training module, its chapters, and the content of those chapters, as well as an introduction of what cities can actually learn from each of these modules. So I'm very proud to present the colleagues who will be introducing each of these modules. But first of all, just to note that this is a resource that is freely available for use, not only by cities, but also, of course, to cities' partners, community-based organizations who are working with cities on these important planning documents, SEACAPs. So I would really invite you to make sure to make use of this as a document, but also invite you to please email the help desk at comsa.org, the email address shown on this slide. If you have any suggestions or edits or other tools that have been helpful for you. So there is an opportunity that as we kind of update this over time, you really will, this won't only be something that ICLEI Africa and GIZ have worked on, but really is part of it's a document that represents tools and resources from the broader community. So please let us know of any additions or comments that you would like to make on this, so that we can also include that in the upcoming revisions of it. And of course, the full SEACAP Toolbox is now available on the website, and the link will be posted in the chat as we are speaking today. You can also find it, if you go to the website, then you go to SEACAP guidelines or guidance, then it will be there for you to find. So first of all, we have a colleague from ICLEI Africa, Dekel Schweitzer, who will be introducing Module 1 and setting the scene for us. Dekel, over to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Dekel. I'm project officer at ICLEI Africa, and I'll go quickly through the first module, which is about setting the scene and providing an overview of the general context before you go more into detail of climate action planning through the following modules. So the first module focuses on the roles in cities in general face to climate change. It also presents broadly the CoMSA initiative and provides an overview of the process to be followed to develop a SEACAP, so a Sustainable Energy Access and Climate Action Plan. And finally, this module introduces an interactive tool, which is called the terminology game, which is a participatory game used during the preparation of a SEACAP. So in terms of structure, this slide presents the way the module is divided. So it has 3 main chapters. The first one, which is on climate change and cities in Africa. The second one, which is on CoMSA's response to the challenges of climate change, both through the presentation of the CoMSA initiative and of the SEACAP process. And the third chapter, which is on the terminology game. So generally speaking, this module allows to have some key information about climate change issues in African cities, and also allows to reflect about the very tight link between these urban areas and climate change, and the cause-effect relationships between both of them. So the second chapter aims to clarify what is the CoMSA initiative, what is a SEACAP, and the main steps for preparation and implementation of such an action plan, and what are the 3 pillars which compose a SEACAP. The last part, the third chapter on terminology game, enables cities to have a concrete tool that they can use during the preparation of the risk and vulnerability assessment, which is part of the preparation of the adaptation pillar of a SEACAP. So thanks to a guide, which is included in this module, the cities can have a full understanding of the kind of topics which need to be raised during the workshop and the way to conduct the game. So in terms of use of this module for the cities, all of this information in this module 1 will be helpful for cities to understand the necessity of starting climate action planning and to have a good contextual knowledge and arguments also to motivate the development of a SEACAP. So cities will have a clear understanding of how to move on concretely with these SEACAPs, and they will have at their disposal a useful game with important terminologies to ensure that participants to workshops can easily grasp key terms, definitions and concepts linked to climate change, especially in the urban context. So that's it for module 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tikal. I really appreciate you giving us an overview of Module 1. Just a reminder to everyone that we have a dedicated question and answers session at the end of these 4 presentations for any questions, but please also type your questions into the question and answers box in the Zoom platform, and we will get to those at the end. I see a number of people also raising your hand, so we will also, I also would invite you to please write down any comments or questions in the questions and answer box or the chat box, and then we will respond once we have finished with these 4 presentations. Thank you. So now over to Ben Hetherington, who leads on the climate mitigation pillar work at ICLEI Africa for the SEACAP development in partnership with GIZ. So Ben, over to you to give us an overview of the climate mitigation pillar.
Thanks, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to give an overview of the climate change mitigation component of the SEACAP Toolbox this morning. But I think it's important to have an understanding of what climate change mitigation means before going into the module's contents, and importantly, what it means for sub-Saharan African countries. Generally, climate change mitigation refers to the actions undertaken to reduce or limit the increase of emissions of greenhouse gases and their concentrations in the atmosphere. And given that these kinds of actions can involve systemic, infrastructural, and behavioral change, careful consideration is really required for cities to take responsibility for future emissions but without compromising the needs for development and poverty alleviation. So the first step for cities to begin thinking about mitigating climate change is having an evidence base to work with. Chapters 2.2 and 2.3 of the mitigation module speak to the practices for compiling data that can be used in a city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which is the platform in which their emissions are reported. The chapter on data collection for inventories explores the types of data required, the common sources of that data, 10 key steps to start data collection processes from scratch, and what to do in the generally likely event that not all the required data will be readily available. This in particular is an understandable challenge, even given the results of the poll earlier this morning, which indicated that data collection and analysis are often the most challenging phases of SEACAP development. However, a useful way around data gaps is the use of proxy data. And this is why there's also an entire chapter on proxy data methodologies for greenhouse gas inventory compilation. This chapter focuses on how to make use of and apply data which is collected at a higher level than the city scale, for example, regional or national data. And quite excitingly, the proxy data tool developed under the CoMSA will also be introduced in this chapter, and further suggestions around where to find richer and more relevant proxy data are also provided. So once cities have gathered all of the data which they require to analyze emissions, they can then make use of the international frameworks which are available for reporting this baseline. These are explained in chapters 2.4 and 2.5. So an introduction is given in chapter 2.4 to the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories, or the GPC, which is a standardized and recognized inventory accounting methodology for subnational governments. It allows for benchmarking and comparisons to happen across cities and over time, and it has a clear and intuitive framework in terms of its parameters, its sectors, and its scopes. It's also consistent with the Common Reporting Framework, which is encouraged by the Global Covenant of Mayors, and it advises on how to rank and improve data quality on emissions. Because of the technically complex nature of calculating greenhouse gas emissions based on data from economic activities within the cities, we also strongly advise using a tool known as the CIRRUS. This is an open source Excel-based tool which is designed to take cities' activity data and automatically run the relevant calculations to see how they translate into emissions. We give an introduction to the global warming potentials and the conversion factors, which CIRRUS employs, and guidance on applying the tool. It's also important to understand that as useful as these two chapters may be for those who are unfamiliar with either the GPC or CIRRUS, the website for each one of those has further rich material in text and video forms on how to use both. So the next steps demonstrate why gathering the evidence base and why the data collection processes are such crucial starting points. Well, in order to have some kind of map in terms of where a city's future emissions might go and what they might look like, a process known as energy modeling can be undertaken. So the chapter on energy modeling outlines the basics and the advantages of different modeling methodologies and what sorts of estimations they might arrive at. Often energy modeling can be a useful exercise to explore a number of scenarios spanning short, medium, and long-term timeframes. And it is with these scenarios that target setting can then take place, which is the focus of chapter 2.7. Here we convey the purpose of mitigation target setting and how it can be used to put forward ambitious and pragmatic mitigation futures. There are a number of different ways in which targets can be set, which will suit different contexts, and so each of them is unpacked in terms of their advantages and their pitfalls. Targets can also be set in ways which are compatible with local development plans and as well as broader targets for that city outside of mitigation. Finally, the last chapter of the module illustrates how to capture and reflect on all of these components of the mitigation pillar of the SEACAP in a consolidated space. So the JRC reporting template offers fields for inputting data on target setting, scenarios, and the baseline emissions inventory, and it's available to all CoM SSA signatories. Guided examples are provided in this chapter to give users a feel for how to fill in the template. And that, in essence, covers the mitigation module. And I look forward to hearing any questions and hope that this is extremely useful to users going forward. Thank you, Rebecca.
So much. I really appreciate that overview of the climate mitigation pillar, and also not only kind of in the theoretical overview of the important concepts that need to all grasp when we are doing data collection, targeting, action plan for mitigation, but actually the tools that are even currently available to support cities in these different steps. So thank you so much. We are now going to hear from Karine Boomer, who is also a colleague at ICLEI Africa and leads on the energy access pillar work, and will be taking us through module 3. Thank you, Karine. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Thanks so much. So like Rebecca mentioned, I'm going to be presenting the contents of the SEACAP, the energy access pillar of the SEACAP Toolbox. And I'm Karine Boomer, a professional officer at ICLEI Africa. So to start with some context and background on energy access in Africa and maybe in Sub-Saharan Africa. Like we can see, this is like a snapshot of the key indicators in Africa, particularly around the energy sector and also it's Africa's economy. From what we are seeing, needless to say that they are highly interrelated or interdependent. For instance, the access to electricity, in the electricity sector, we are seeing that of the population without access to electricity, close to 70% of that population is coming from Africa, from the African continent. Likewise, in access to clean cooking or in the cooking sector, about close to 40% of the population in 2018 without access to clean cooking was from Africa. So when you compare this to our contribution, to Africa's contribution to the global GDP, we see Africa is contributing just about 6% or so to the global GDP in 2018, and the growth rate is very, very low compared to the population growth rate and the percentage of Africa's contribution to the global population. This points directly to the fact that lack of access to electricity, lack of access to energy, clean cooking in Africa is greatly affecting Africa's economy. And that's why we're seeing very limited demand, relatively low demand in the energy sector. For us to be able to increase the GDP or increase our contribution to the global GDP, for us to improve on our economy and meet with other sustainable development goals, we need to focus a lot on increasing access to energy, increasing access to electricity within the continent. And that is part of the reason why the SEACAP itself focuses on assisting local governments, because action at the local level is what would help the African countries attain their sustainable development goals, particularly access to energy. So the SEACAP has been developed to assist cities to know how to, or understand how to plan to increase their access to energy, both in the clean cooking sector and in the access to electricity sector. And as you would notice, there is also a focus on institutions. So sort of assessing the percentage of public buildings and institutions that have access to electricity. So that's just some background on what the status of energy access in Africa. And now, what is actually this energy access that we are talking about? So the International Energy Agency defines energy access as a household having reliable, affordable access to both clean cooking facilities and to electricity, which is enough to supply a basic bundle of energy services initially, and then an increasing level of electricity over time to reach a regional average. Also, what is worth noting in this definition are the key sectors that it covers, or the key terms within this definition, I would say. For instance, the household, which is very important in the definition, access to electricity, access to clean cooking, and then the affordability and the reliability of the energy itself. So these are key things to consider when talking about energy access. It's also worth knowing that at the moment, there's no universally acceptable definition for energy access, and particularly for the Sub-Saharan African context, there's a lot of debate also going on about the relevance of the existing definitions with respect to energy access. But first and foremost, the key attributes of energy access as depicted in the previous definition are aspects of security, that's the reliability of the energy access, the sustainability, the percentage of the energy that actually comes from renewable sources, how affordable that energy is, if people are able to pay for it or are even willing to pay for it, and a lot of other attributes like the safetyness of the energy itself, the capacity. And when you look at this also in the African perspective, you see that we have a sort of specific challenges, or when you look at the attributes. For instance, access itself is a key issue in Africa when you compare it to the rest of the world, who maybe have attained almost 100% electrification or energy access and are focusing now on affordability. Now, if you contextualize it to Africa, you see that our focus at this point is trying to reach 100% electrification by 2030 or even earlier than that, while incorporating the aspects of affordability and security, maybe progressively or even where possible in parallel. So the SEACAP Toolbox has been developed in line with the JRC Guidebook to help cities plan for energy access, to help cities develop action plans that would enable them increased access to energy, access to clean cooking, access to electricity at the local level. So this toolbox has also been designed in the same format, following the steps or stages required to develop an energy access action plan or sustainable energy access action plan. And like you would see, the modules or the chapters covered within this energy access module of the toolbox. We have the first section or the first chapter, which gives like a background of what energy access is, its relevance in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the actual processes and stages required to develop the SEACAP. And then the next chapter, which focuses on sort of elaborates on the key steps needed to develop the access to energy assessment itself. So how to conduct your access to energy assessment. And in line with what we found out today at the beginning of the session, through the post, we realized that energy data collection is really a challenge, especially in Africa and across different cities, especially the cities we've worked with, East Africa, West Africa, across the continent. Actually, data availability is an issue, and that also explains why we're having these challenges. So the toolbox has provided some resources to guide cities collect data, like there's a questionnaire itself developed, there's an analysis of the sampling techniques that are available and the recommended one to use during data collection, both for primary data collection and also secondary data collection, and also data collection tips, so what to take note of during data collection, ethical considerations during data collection, and all the like. So that would also be found in the toolbox. And then now there's, like I said, there's an elaborated version of the data collection guide. So a questionnaire has been developed using the COBO Toolbox. So the COBO Toolbox is like a questionnaire that can function even offline, and it functions digitally on your phones, your smart devices, your laptops, tablets, and all the like. And you can collect data both virtually and in person, as we've experienced during this COVID period, where some of our cities had to collect data through telephone interviews. That has been very helpful. So that tool is also present in the toolbox, and there's also a lot, sort of an explanation of what to do during data collection, and responsibilities of different actors that should be involved during data collection, and how to respond to different scenarios that you might encounter during data collection. For example, go to a house and they're not willing to respond to you, what should you do? All of that detailed in the toolbox. And then the next, which is that on target setting and action planning, also gives an sort of an indication of the steps to establish the energy access vision for their cities, how to set targets that are small, that are achievable, that are time bound, that will help them meet their energy access goals and visions. And then it also sort of provides examples of targets or other visions that have been cities, just to provide a framework or guidance for cities to understand what target setting and action planning actually is. And it also sort of provides characteristics or key features of good actions or energy access actions, with examples of what cities could do in the energy efficiency space to increase clean cooking or increase access to electricity, off-grid solutions. So those have been provided also in the toolbox, as you would see. And then finally, the last chapter then focuses on the JRC template. As has been mentioned by the other panelists before me, there's a JRC template where cities to report on. And for the energy access pillar, there are key indicators relating to the electricity sector and to the clean cooking sector. So the box provides an overview of what is required as per that reporting template, and it also guides cities on a step-by-step basis on how to report to those indicators, both for the access to energy assessment section of that template, and also for the different targets and actions found in the template. And as Rebecca mentioned, we will be updating this, the SEACAP toolbox itself over time as need arises, and learnings as we'll be learning from our work with other cities and with inputs from our other stakeholders, who would update that with more valuable information that would help cities as much as possible to be able to develop their energy access action plans with or without the support of external parties or other development partners. Yeah, okay, last thing. So other tools that are found in this toolbox, so besides the PowerPoint presentations that you would see, there's a Word document, sort of an elaborated manual on how to conduct data collection, like field data collection. There is also a consent form, sort of a template or sample that you can use or customize during data collection, because respondents most likely would have to sign a consent form to agree that they are ready to participate in the data collection work. Same for the tracking form. And then there's also, like I mentioned, the actual questionnaire that has been developed, both the Excel-based version and the digital version. So the link to the digital version is also found in the toolbox. And then ethical considerations during data collection. And then there's also an outline, sort of a template of how you can report your energy pillar of the SEACAP. Like it gives an outline, like the introduction, the energy pillar, what it should contain, and the things to focus on. And I think it's going to be very useful, sort of simplifies things for cities in addition to what the SEACAP Development Guidebook has provided. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you for that very useful overview of the energy access pillar, so all the practical tools and tips around data collection, setting, and action planning. And I'm sure the cities are very interested to take a look at all that information provided. We're now going to turn to our final speaker, who is going to be speaking on, as per the poll, actually the priority for many of the cities attending the webinar today, which is the adaptation pillar. This is module 4. So Kirsty, over to you to give us a a brief introduction to what we can find in Module 4.
Perfect. Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kirsty Griffin, and as Rebecca said, I'll be going into the adaptation pillar of the SEACAP toolkit. I must say it was very interesting for me to see 44% of the participants in the webinar today foresee that adaptation is a priority for the city. So it's great to hear that, and I hope the adaptation pillar of the SEACAP will help make things a bit easier. So just to provide a brief overview, I'll talk about today. My portion of this presentation will cover three main aspects. So first of all, I'll just provide a quick overview of what climate change adaptation actually is. It should be covered under the adaptation pillar and a brief explainer of each. And included in the adaptation pillar segment of the SEACAP toolkit and what cities can hope to learn. So first up, as you can see on the screen, there's a definition there about climate change adaptation. So there are a number of definitions for adaptation floating about, and that's why I think it's important to set the scene with an adaptation, although many of us will most likely know what adaptation is at this point. This one here is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. Change adaptation adjustment to actual or expected climate change and its effects. Adaptation actions undertaken in anticipation of the adverse effects of climate change and aim to prevent or minimize the damage impacts of climate change can cause and take advantage of opportunities that may arise. So essentially, climate change adaptation is looking forward to seeing what are the possible impacts of climate change or subnational government and planning ahead to respond to those. And often in the process of doing so, there's a number of opportunities or benefits that could come to your way as a city. So next slide, please. Okay, so adaptation pillar of the SEACAP. So the adaptation pillar consists of three main steps. The first one is to develop a risk and vulnerability assessment, or an RNVA. The second is to develop an adaptation goal or a climate resilient target. And the third is to develop a climate change adaptation action plan. Next slide, please. You'll see here, I've just visualized it for you. So there's a 3 steps and each one follows after the other. So I'll provide, as I said, a brief overview of what's included in each one of those steps. So the first step we follow is developing a risk vulnerability assessment. Just the back one, please. The risk vulnerability assessment is essentially our baseline. So what is included in a risk and vulnerability assessment is an overview of what is the current climate that a city or subnational government is currently experiencing, as well as an overview of the climate hazards that we're experiencing. So talking about cyclones or heat waves, or if you're in the northern hemisphere, heavy snowfall or snowstorms. Those are what we deem to be called climate hazards. So the first part of a risk and vulnerability assessment literally just provides us with a snapshot of what is actually happening in your climate in your region. On top of that, the risk and vulnerability assessment also includes an overview of how the sectors in your various government sectors are actually being impacted by those hazards. And the hazards affect sectors in varying ways. So some sectors might be impacted by drought, while others may not, whereas other sectors may be impacted by cyclones, whereas others may not. So by having a clear snapshot of what are the hazards that are affecting your city, we're able to see which sectors and population groups are most adversely affected. The last thing included in a risk and vulnerability assessment is essentially what is happening in the future. So we try to look forward using for climate information portal. And this basically gives us that baseline information. So everyone earlier on was saying how data access is one of the most difficult. I think we said 56% of people said data. And that help us. So the risk and vulnerability assessment is essentially our baseline of information. Once we have, the next step is to do the adaptation goal or climate. Terms are generally quite interchangeable, so we use both because some use goals, some use target, but they're essentially the same. And this is the where we want to go in the whole process. So you know what's happening in your city and what's likely to happen in the future in terms of how your hazards will change, increase in frequency or decrease in frequency. We now need to have a plan to work towards. So we need to have a target. What do we want to achieve? Last step is our climate change adaptation action plan. The how do we get there? So essentially, this is our step-by-step process. Once you finish your risk and vulnerability assessment, in your adaptation action, important to your city and those that are being most adversely affected, and come up with actions and projects that can effectively reduce the impacts of climate change to those sectors, but ultimately to your city. So the action plan is how do we get there? How do we achieve the goal that we set in the adaptation goal and reduce the risks of climate change to our city that we outlined in. So next slide, I would like to talk about what's included. Bullet points, and these correspond to the 7 modules that are included inside the SEACAP adaptation specifically. The first module really talks about key concepts and definitions. And I've included this specifically because not all of us are extremely familiar with the climate change space or the climate change terminology. So it includes information on what is climate, what is weather, but it also goes into those more complex terms of adaptive capacity, resilience. Can't think of any more on the top of my head. It essentially goes in more complex terms that are bandied about quite freely in the climate change may not necessarily be clear. So the first module is literally concepts, definitions you need to know in order to start your adaptation planning journey. The next module in bullet 2 provides a detailed overview of what to include under the adaptation itself. So this is essentially what I've just explained in the previous 2 slides. It'll talk in a bit more detail than I have now about the 3 steps, the risk and vulnerability assessment, the goal/climate resilient target, and the climate change adaptation action plan, and what to include under each one of those components. The third step in our climate change adaptation modules is how it started. So this provides an overview of all the steps that one needs to do before you can even start developing the other steps. What do you need to do before you even get going? And this refers to things like organizing a team, creating a champion, identifying where you could find the data, what are the potential sources of information there, and just basically it's the equivalent of getting one's ducks in the row. So that's the third step, how to get started. And then the next 3 bullet points is really getting into the nitty of things. So the fourth module, 4.4, is how to develop a vulnerability assessment. So one of the things we saw earlier is 56% of people struggle with the data access component. So this module really delves very deeply into all the high-level components of what's included in RNVA, but then hints and tips of where to get information, how to source the various data points that you actually need in order to develop your full risk and vulnerability assessment. The same thing is covered under this module, which is about setting an adaptation goal and climate resilient target. So it provides detail of what's. The next step is how to develop an adaptation action plan. And as with the 2 preceding, it provides a detailed overview of an action plan and how to essentially get there. What are the key steps that one needs to follow and make in order to make sure that you have all the information included in your adaptation action plan. And then the 7th and final module included in the adaptation action plan is how to actually report. So Rebecca mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar that the SEACAP toolkit is extremely linked to the JRC. So this final module includes extreme detail on how to report your climate change adaptation components onto the JRC with little snapshots of the Excel sheet and then detailed information and explaining exactly how to fill in this information. So by the end of completing this module, you should have a clear idea of what are the key concepts and definitions. You have a clear idea of what to include in the adaptation pillar, a clear idea of how to do each of those three components, last but not least, how to report on it all once you're done. So I'll just leave you one final slide before I end off. And I essentially just wanted to leave you with this message of completing the 3 steps under the adaptation pillar offers cities and local governments an opportunity to not only plan for climate change in a proactive way, but also to capitalize on the benefits of responding to climate change proactively, including realizing hand back to Rebecca now.
Thank you, Kirsty. I think that is not a kind of valuable quote for the adaptation pillar, but actually for each of the pillars under SEACAP development process. So thank you so much, Kirsty, Ben, Karine, and Dekel, for providing overviews of the different modules for all the city other participants here today, as just really an introduction to the CoM SSA SEACAP Toolbox. We now have the opportunity to have questions and answer session. So what I am going to invite you to put some questions into the chat or into the Q&A so that we can respond to these. I think just a first question that we have is, how can I use the toolbox as a city? So this is a very important question, because while we've presented the toolbox to you today, what's the next step? So when this webinar concludes, you will be redirected to the web where the toolbox now lives, and you can download it. You can download it either as kind of as the individual chapters or as one large download. It's a very large PDF download if you're going to download everything all together. So I'll also invite you to take a look at the overview document to see which is maybe most relevant for you of where you are in your stage of SEACAP development. And there would be multiple ways that you can use it. First of all, you can use it as a way to train process then apply, or how do these suggested steps or tools make sense for my city. You can present it, or you can work with the civil society organizations or partners that you are working with on the SEACAP. You can have a COVID regulation kind of gathering of some kind, or later when we are permitted to have large gatherings, can have those gatherings where we actually present the information toolbox and host the workshops around and facilitate discussions. And then the third way I would say is that, to have it on your computer, or maybe even, I think if you do want to print it out, it is quite a large document to print out, just to be aware. But if you have it available just for reference, so while you're doing it step, then you can actually reference the different kind of suggested approaches and steps and that sort of thing in the toolbox, working on your SEACAP. And then what you can also see is quite helpful is that you can say, you can start to kind of the process for using the different tools and understanding different steps that are required, because of course there are many different steps underneath each of the kind of pillars, and each of the main steps, which are of course data collection, analysis, target setting, and action planning. So so we have a few more questions here. So is there any city that has used this tool to its logical conclusion, and what are the experiences? So the first so this is the first time that the toolbox has been launched as one kind of repository of information with all these different steps and tools and everything for the SEACAP. Although the JRC guidebook and the summary guidebook have existed before, this is a kind of toolbox that provides a bit more kind of in-depth and a bit more of the practical step-by-step processes. So this is the first time. So we haven't had a city use this whole thing, but as ICLEI Africa, in partnership with our work with GIZ, we have used these approaches many times. And that's so everything that has been put into the toolbox is kind of a mixture of the experiences that ICLEI Africa and GIZ and other the other CoM SSA partners have had, and as well as, you know, the indications from the JRC guidebook. So, and there are cities that have completed full SEACAPs, and I would really recommend that you also speak to the reach out email the CoM SSA Secretariat at helpdesk at comsa.org, or through the contact link on the web page, also to find out more about those cities who have actually have actually completed their SEACAP. Then in terms of, we have another question here from Maria. So maybe instead of me asking and answering all the questions, so I'll also open this up to the other panelists also to respond. But considering the question from Maria is, considering the difficulty of the SEACAP, what kind of external support should cities contract? And has any city developed a SEACAP by themselves? So indeed, the goal, I think, around SEACAP development is for cities to be able to drive these processes themselves. And there have been some cities that, you know, actually are undertaking the SEACAP development process. There, we learned about it in one of the previous CoM SSA webinars. We had the opportunity to hear from the mayor of Entebbe in Uganda, who's currently undertaking a SEACAP development process, and they are doing this in-house. But they are, what's very important is they're not doing it alone, even though they're doing it in-house, because they've reached out to their sister city of Kampala, and they're actually using the experiences of Kampala, who also developed their SEACAP, to influence their process. So I would say some cities have, you know, started working on this process, but also that it's also very helpful to make sure that you're reaching out to your other CoM SSA sister signatories, and that can definitely be facilitated through the CoM SSA Secretariat. Furthermore, I'd just like to also raise a very important point that Angelica from GIZ has noted, is that the experience of the SEACAP development process so far is often that it's very helpful to use consultants or NGOs to support in the data collection process, because it's not often that cities have, you know, the ability to kind of do the house-to-house surveys. It can be very time and resource intensive. So that's definitely something you would want to partner with an NGO or a private sector partner to ensure delivery on. I'm not sure on the number of topics that I've kind of raised so far. Would any of the other presenters like to also reflect on their experiences of working with cities?
Rebecca, I would like to reflect. Sorry, everyone watching. I'm just keeping my camera off because my internet connectivity is a bit slow, and I'd rather you hear me rather than I disappear completely. But just in terms of cities developing their own SEACAPs, in my experience, I think it actually stems down that once you get going with the SEACAP, once you're past the data collection phase, the process itself is not actually too difficult. And I believe once you go through the toolkit and all the modules included in there, everything will be a lot clearer. So I think the main barriers are actually more a lack of confidence in what's required. So once you just start engaging with things, then you actually do start to feel a little bit better and can actually start more confidently engaging things. So in terms of getting support, I think what might be quite useful is to attend webinars such as this, where you can actually learn about the different components included under each of the pillars and just start trying to work it out as you go along. And then of course, reaching out to the CoM SSA help desk, which is always here to support at any time with any level of the pillars. We have, as you've seen, Karine for energy access, Ben for mitigation, adaptation, I'm here as well. And then of course the broader CoM SSA team, both at ICLEI and GIZ. So there is support out there without not necessarily having to contract someone, but just starting the process yourself once you've gone through the modules. So I would say it's a confidence thing, but once you get going, you'll be fine.
Thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, that was a very helpful reflection, and also just reflecting on that getting the process of getting the wheels turning, it's always almost the hardest part. But I see that we also have Karine, would you like to also add in here?
Yes, I'd just like to reflect on data collection, because I see a number of questions also coming regarding data collection. So from our experience, for instance, in Kenya, what we've realized also is that bringing the national government on board in time is also very essential, because in as much as we would do primary data collection at the household level, we also need data that is only available at the national level, or electricity generation company, which most often are either parastatals that is privately and state-owned, or are just only state-owned. So it's important to engage the Ministry of Energy at the very beginning, right from the conception or initiation phase of the work, so that the ministry and the relevant entities understand the data that is going to be needed to develop the different pillars of the SEACAP, especially the mitigation pillar, which also has a lot of data relating to the energy sector, and also the energy access pillar. So once the Ministry of Energy is on board, they are going to help facilitate the process of getting in contact with the other relevant entities in the country, and helping to provide the data that will be needed to sort of develop the SEACAP, in addition to the primary data collection work that will be done. So it's usually a combination of both primary data collection and secondary data collection.
Thank you. Yes, so this speaks to a number of points that are kind of referenced and detailed in the toolbox. And the specific modules for each pillar, which first of all is understanding the kind of partners and stakeholders in each of the pillars for your city. So for example, in some areas, your city may hold the majority of the mandate, but in other areas, maybe national government or the regional or state government has the functional mandate for the majority, and therefore partnerships need to be formed, and that's quite critical to a successful SEACAP, is being able to access that data. And it's the first time you do it, it always is going to be more difficult than the second, third, fourth time that you do it. And that's experience from across the continent, across the world really, is that building those relationships allows for an easier flow of data. But of course, even at the national level, sometimes the data that we require is not available, and that's where it becomes very important to especially when we and Ben referenced this in the mitigation pillar, the idea of proxy data, because we don't want cities, of course, to just be sitting in the data collection phase and never getting to action and never getting to implementation, because implementation is really where we're all trying to work towards to make a real impact on the lives of residents, businesses, and cities overall. So it's very important that we find ways to make it easier for cities, especially in data scarce environments, to really start with maybe the first. The SEACAP is also not a static document. It is a document that is updated on a regular basis, not necessarily annually, but it can be, of course, based on cities' own processes. But so the first one, you can definitely be using proxy data, which is why through the CoM SSA initiative, a proxy data tool has been developed to allow for cities to not get kind of stuck in not being able to answer critical questions about any of the pillars just because you don't have data. Another way around data collection is that Kirsty mentioned the importance of this online open access tool, and there are a few of these for the adaptation pillar, especially around both historic climate data, but also climate projections. But what's very important in any of these processes is that we don't only rely on kind of desktop data, but also lived experience. So this is why, especially in the adaptation pillar, but it's also made reference to in the energy access and then in part in the mitigation pillar, is really the idea of kind of processes for participatory data collection. So how do you work with others, and how do you design spaces where you can capture that data that isn't written down anywhere, but rather it's from people's daily experiences. And that is incredibly valuable data. And it mustn't be dismissed just because it isn't on a formal system. So it's a very rich data source. And so the SEACAP Toolbox also provides an overview of how to go about doing those participatory mapping processes and what the outcomes can look like and what tools and resources can be used to capture that participatory mapping work. I see we have a few more questions here. So I'm just having a look here at some of the questions. I would see there's a lot of interest in also this presentation. So as mentioned earlier, this presentation will be made available as a recording with both the English and the French available. And that will be on the CoMSA website and YouTube channel. But then, of course, the presentation itself and the kind of the overview document will also all be available on the CoMSA website. So I hope whenever you think you maybe have a question about the SEACAP, you go straight to the CoMSA website, because that is the kind of the one-stop shop for all CoMSA related resources for cities. And I also would like to mention to everyone very proudly to say that ICLEI Africa is the secretary, now holds the CoMSA Secretariat. And what this means is that cities can send questions to the ICLEI Africa team and our expertise and that of partners, many partners that we work with. That can be requests. Can be emailed to the help desk at comsa.org email address, and we will be able to respond and also and either connect you with other cities to learn more about different processes, or with partners, or actually if there are already tools available and resources to share those with you. So any additional questions can also be shared in that way. So I think we will now take this opportunity to do our second poll of the day. If you just give me a moment to share my screen. So Sonia, if you could please do the second poll of the day, make that live. So we would really like to understand from you, and we will have a few minutes to answer here, your responses to these three questions. So do you feel that this webinar has provided you with useful information for the CoM SEACAP process? Then yes, no, or I'm uncertain. Then number two, will you be making use of the CoM SSA Toolbox in the next 6 months? So is your intention to download it and have a look at it and, as far as possible, make use of it? And then the third question really links to what I've just announced in terms of ICLEI Africa being hosting the CoMSA Secretariat, is that we will be having many more of these information, kind of online information sharing opportunities in both webinars, but also trainings, where we will also have the opportunity to delve deeper into these different pillars. So, and the answers there for each of them are yes, no, or uncertain. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes, or not a few minutes, about a minute longer, to respond here. But just from my side, what's also very important, I'd like to reiterate the invitation to all cities, partners, civil society organizations, really to email the help desk if you had a look at some of the SEACAP Toolbox different chapters and modules, and you think that there would be something helpful to be included in those different modules, whether it's a tool or some additional content, we would really welcome that this becomes a toolbox that not only captures the processes that ICLEI Africa and GIZ and the other kind of CoMSA partners are leading, but that all of you who are actually implementing SEACAPs too also are able to contribute. So we would really invite all your contributions there, and to make sure that this is a document that's representative and really useful to everyone who is doing SEACAP. So I think we can close the poll now. Thanks, Sonia. Have a look at the results here. So this also provides us an opportunity to know, are we providing something of value to you? Because that's the most important for us. So we have a very positive kind of response to the first question of, was this webinar useful for your SEACAP process? So that's of 92%. So that's a big kind of thumbs up for us, and we really appreciate that. And so we will endeavor to do more of these and go further in depth. Second is, will you be making use of the toolbox in the next 6 months? So again, 92% saying yes, and please also provide us comments, and if you feel something could be more usable to help, because obviously these are done from a number of people's perspectives, but your perspective is of course always valuable. And then the third question is around, are you intending to participate in future CoMSA webinars and trainings? And again, a very big yes. Actually, everyone answered yes to that, over 100% somehow, I'm not sure exactly, but we got 26 instead of 25 responses for that question. So thank you very much. That is a big, that's very helpful to us to know that this was a helpful webinar for you, and that what we're doing is just introducing the toolbox to you today. But definitely, as we continue this journey together, we will be, delving deeper into the various aspects, because really we only, touched the very tip of, what all of the SEACAP is. And we know that cities require additional support, and we're looking to do this as best as we possibly can to the largest range of cities. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm now going to hand over to Kruti to just close the webinar for us on behalf of GIZ.
Great, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everybody from ICLEI Africa who presented the toolbox. Thank you for all of the cities that have joined us and have had a lot of interactions in the chat and through the Q&A. We hope some of your questions were answered. For any more open questions, please always feel free to reach out to helpdesk@comsa.org, and the technical help desk will try our best to answer your questions. The SEACAP Toolbox is available on the website as mentioned, and we appreciate any feedback and any comments on the tools themselves. And with that, again, thanks a lot for joining, and we hope to see you again in another of these webinars. Thank you.